Hi, everyone. My name is Carrie Braden. I'd like to spend about a half hour with you talking about financing your degree here at the Leonard College of Medicine at the University of Vermont. I'm going to be going through some slides and we'll have time for questions at the end. Some housekeeping information. My role here is as the Medical Student Financial Services Coordinator. I do have a satellite office or a hotel office, whatever you'd like to call it, in the medical school. The main Student Financial Services office is across campus in the Waterman building. We have found that medical students have very unique needs when it comes to billing and financial aid and financial literacy. So that's why I'm here in the medical school full time. The student financial services items that we cover with our student population is the administration of financial aid, whether that be loans, grants, and scholarships. We do processing of financial aid, and we do lots of upfront counseling, especially for medical students. We handle billing for tuition, payments, and accounts receivable, kind of like the cashier's office, if you will. And then we have education, debt counseling, and financial literacy outreach. You've all probably been in contact with us, but in case not, here's our website and our phone number. And we're here to help all medical students, whether that be admitted students that are waiting to begin the program, such as yourself. The bulk of who we serve, of course, is current students, and then we also field inquiries and calls from alumni as well. So the first thing I'm going to talk about, let me just see if I can get this sidebar to go away here. The first thing that I'm going to talk about is the cost of attendance, which is also known as the financial aid budget. And you will see this breakdown at every school that you're considering. And the reason is because the Department of Education requires that schools break down the total cost to stay in compliance, and mainly it has to do with the education loan programs and proving that the students need the funds. But of course, we also need to break it down so that we have transparency about what the program costs. So the annual tuition and student fees are the two things that are formally billed for. And we, of course, have the in-state values on the left and the out-of-state values on the right. The education loan fees, which is the third item down, that's not something that we bill for. It's not a fee that we actually expect you to pay. By us building it into the cost of attendance, it allows us to essentially give you the financial aid to deduct it out of your loan. And what I mean by that is the Department of Education has loan origination fees. For example, if you borrow a Stafford loan, which we'll talk about in a minute, they deduct a 1% fee and then send the remaining 99% to the school. So that obviously gives the student a shortfall. So we are authorized to add the loan fees into the budget so that essentially you don't notice it when they take it out, if that makes sense. We account for room, meals, transportation to and from campus, putting gas in your car, and then miscellaneous expenses such as cell phone, clothes, and that type of thing. If we were looking at a second or third year medical student budget, there would be an extra line item in here for national board exam fees. The transportation category would be a little bit higher, but for purposes of this example, we're looking at the first year medical student cost of attendance. The campus health insurance rate for next year has not been released yet. This year it is just about $2,700. If you did opt into campus insurance, we can add a line item in the financial aid budget to help you pay for that cost. A little bit about financial aid refunds. So let's say, for example, just going back to the screen for a second, let's say, for example, that somebody took the full cost of attendance in financial aid, whether that be all federal education loans or a combination of scholarship and loans. What would happen is we would disperse half of this figure. So let's say if you were in state, we would pay in all your financial aid for about $32,000. And after we pay off half your tuition and half your student fees, we would then give you what's called a refund, and you would be able to use that for living expenses. Um, for financial aid administration and billing purposes, anything January 1 through June 30th is considered spring, and anything July 1st through December is considered fall. There is no summer term, so everything works on a 6-month schedule. So you would see half of this tuition billed in the summer and the other half of the tuition and fees billed in December and January. Refund, which is essentially a direct deposit, again, for you to use for your living expenses. They happen twice every academic year. And here I've put the dates for when they would happen for each academic year. Once we take out the tuition and the student fees from the overall cost of attendance, the amount is just about $10,000 that you would receive. And again, that is if you take the maximum financial aid package. So you would need to make sure that you budget that $10,000 over 6 months to last you until when the next refund happens. We do follow the Vermont integrated curriculum to a certain extent. We look at the overall shell dates of the semester, but one thing we don't have a way to mirror is the actual levels within the Vermont integrated curriculum. So a question I get a lot is, once you move from foundations to clerkship level, we can't renew financial aid in March. We have to wait until July 1st when the new federal fiscal year begins. So this is how our refund schedules and amounts work. It's helpful when you're budgeting your expenses and your rent for months at a time. The biggest gap that you'll see is next January. You'd have to have that refund last you for a full 7 months, because in the second year we can't disperse anything until August. So that's the largest gap that you would see, is between January of 2020 and August of 2020. Sometimes that we can change the cost of attendance and increase it. If you opt into campus health insurance, we can add a line item for that. If you have outside health insurance, unfortunately, we cannot add a line item for that. You would need to reach out to Student Financial Services to request any of these appeal examples. It's not something that we can do automatically. Another example is if you have dependent children, whether that be you're paying for daycare or just general dependent maintenance, then you can appeal for extra loan money to cover that. If you have residency prep costs, which everybody does, but whatever the residency prep costs in your 4th year are, whether that be match fees, interview travel, you can apply to be reimbursed for those costs in your 4th year. If you have away rotations and costs associated with that, this would be once you're in your 3rd and 4th year in the curriculum. If those away rotations are not offered in Vermont and you have good academic reasons for needing to travel for it, then we can help you recoup some costs with extra loan money for away rotations. And then other miscellaneous special circumstances that might warrant an appeal. Some examples are listed here, such as having to pay more in rent than if you were to have a roommate. This could be due to health or safety issues. If you ever found yourself needing to retake board exams, those board exams with the USMLE are quite costly. So if you needed to retake a board exam, we could reimburse you to pay for that again. Study materials are not automatically included in the budget just because there are such a wide range of study materials for board exams. So we do that on a case-by-case basis. And then any other circumstances that you feel are considered extenuating, you're always welcome to appeal. Some examples that do not warrant an appeal would be credit card debt, being tight on your budget in general, car repairs. There are car maintenance is already in the regular financial aid budget. And then losing prior income to begin school, that's also not something that would warrant an appeal. And all of these guidelines are followed by the Department of Education. So it's not just the University of Vermont that is coming up with these examples, but we're also following the Department of Education regulations. So if you ever have a situation where you think you are eligible for an appeal, or you've got the maximum financial aid budget already and it's still not enough, definitely reach out to Student Financial Services. Along the same lines as the cost of attendance and the budget, within that is the residency classifications. The registrar's office on campus handles residency classifications. Student Financial Services does not have a role. A lot of the regulations come from UVM, but my understanding is that a lot of those regulations also trickle down from the Vermont State Legislature. If you are assessed as out of state and you begin your curriculum, it's pretty rare to be approved to in-state after that. Preliminarily, they might assign you out of state, and before you even matriculate, you'll need to do several pages of an appeal packet if you feel that you are in state. So that I'm more so referring to after you begin matriculation. It's rare to be switched to in-state. So let's say, for example, the spring and summer before you matriculate, you go through the whole residency classification process. They assign you out-of-state status, for example, and then you begin school in August. After that is when it is rare to be switched to in-state status. Some examples that do not warrant a switch after you start school. Unfortunately, it won't make a difference if a student files Vermont taxes, if they marry a Vermonter, if they buy a home here, even getting a Vermont driver's license. None of that will affect the university switching you to in-state status. Student Financial Services simply charges tuition according to what you're labeled as. The Vermont Student Assistance Corporation, also known as VSAC, they run a very generous state grant program. It's up to, I believe, $12,000 per year based on income. They have their own definition of what they consider a Vermonter to be. So even if the university classifies you as out of state, it would still behoove you to check in with VSAC, especially if you feel like your residency is a gray area. Then it's good to reach out to VSAC and apply for their grant program, because we do see out-of-state students receive a VSAC grant through the state of Vermont sometimes. The registrar's office on main campus would be who you'd want to contact with any questions about this piece. Here's their email and then their website as well, and they can definitely provide you with the most accurate information when it comes to residency classification. Switching gears a little bit and talking about paying for medical school. Starting at the way bottom, I know it can be easier said than done, but definitely use personal resources as much as you can first, whether that be earnings, savings, or family assistance. Next, you'd want to look at gift aid, whether that be things like that state VSAC grant that I just mentioned, outside and institutional scholarships, basically sources of financial aid that you do not need to repay. And we'll touch on that again in a minute. And then the two large federal education loan programs through the Department of Education are the Stafford Loan and the Graduate Plus Loan. Both of those loan programs are for right around $40,000 per year if you're an out-of-state student. If you're in-state, you can still borrow $40,000 in the Stafford loan, but you would be able to borrow a little bit less in the Graduate Plus loan. Some of you may have already utilized the Stafford loan program as an undergraduate, or you may have even utilized the Graduate Plus loan if you did a post-bac or a master's degree. So the main difference with these loan programs as a medical student is that you can borrow more, specifically with the Stafford loan, than you could with an undergrad. And of course, if you ever find yourself in the red zone looking at private loans or credit cards, definitely come speak with us. Private loans really exist for undergraduates because they do not have the same borrowing capacity in the federal program that a medical student does. So students should not be shopping around for private loans at all. They don't have the same benefits that the federal loans have, and we'll talk about that again in a minute. As far as federal student loans, they are very easy to obtain credit-wise. We really just need the FAFSA as a formality. We actually don't look at the FAFSA data at all. We just need a complete FAFSA on file as a formality for the Department of Education. Education loans are the best kind of debt to have. If you're going to have debt, we like to encourage students to look at the long-term return of investment. So even if you end up borrowing a couple $100,000, the end return of investment that you'll see with your eventual salary will pay it off in more than one way. The paperwork is quite easy. Starting this summer, we will start to prompt students to do some items on the Department of Education website, such as completing the loan agreement, completing entrance counseling, and things like that. It's a little bit too early to get started on that at this time, but we will be reaching out to students soon to do that. Federal education loans have a lot of great repayment options, much more so than private education loans have. Some examples are income-based billing. you are obviously eligible to suspend payments during school and even during residency if you need to, although we don't recommend the latter. Interest does accrue, but at least your credit is protected from being delinquent, even if you're not making payments during school or your training. And then private refinancing is gaining popularity. So we still recommend students borrow under the federal program and keep their loans in the federal program during their training. But private refinancing is gaining a lot of momentum, specifically for students that are transitioning from residency to practice. So that's a hot topic, and just in the last few years, it's been gaining a lot of ground. So just bear in mind that if you're feeling as though the federal interest rates are not great, way down the line, you can certainly have the opportunity to refinance for a lower rate. Here's a snapshot of what the federal interest rates have done for the last 4 years. The unsubsidized Stafford loan always has a 1% lower rate than the Graduate Plus loan. So when you see both loans in your financial aid package, which most students will see both, you'd always want to make sure you maximize the unsubsidized Stafford loan before you dip into the Graduate Plus loan. So the rates have gone up a little bit the last few years. I'm not sure what they're going to do next year, but they do remain fixed for the life of the loan. So looking at this screen, if you were a class of 2019 graduate that's about to graduate in a few months, and let's say you used both loan programs all 4 years of medical school, then you would in theory have 8 different loans right now, all with 8 different interest rates based on the loan type and the year that you took it out. When you finish school, you do have the opportunity to consolidate with the Department of Education and take what's called a weighted average interest rate for all of the rates and balances that you personally have. But the rates are at the loan and year level and not at the student level. Touching on some education loan statistics a little bit, the AAMC releases what's called the Debt Fact Card each fall, and they come up with some wonderful data to, just benchmark against and things like that. So I'll just let you all take a minute here to look at these figures. So last year, in the 17-18 academic year, we disbursed about $20 million in federal education loans, of which about 2/3 was the more beneficial program with the Stafford loan. About 37% of our MD students begin medical school with education debt from a prior degree. So if that applies to you, you would want to make sure starting this summer that any prior loans you have go back into school deferment, since you are entitled to that by returning to school. And then in our graduating class of 2018 for last year, which is the most recent data we have, 84% of our students held education debt, and the average was only a few $1,000s more than the national average. Moving to talk about scholarships for a minute, the way that UVM spends the bulk of our endowments and scholarships is with our admissions department taking a holistic approach towards recruitment scholarships. They look at several things, whether that be scores from interview day, academic merit, of course, diversity, whether that be race, ethnicity, age, sexual orientation, and then they also look at socioeconomic disadvantaged background. For example, if you report that you're a first-generation college student or along those lines. They do not look at FAFSA data. The FAFSA is really designed for undergraduates, and the data is not entirely helpful when it comes to graduate professional level students. So they more so look at data from your AMCAS application. They do automatically consider everybody. I can't stress that enough, that there's no separate application required. They do consider all admitted students. About 15% of our accepted students will receive a scholarship offer. Typically, they notify students within a few weeks of acceptance if an offer does exist. However, in late spring, once students start to drop multiple spots, sometimes they will definitely do a second round of scholarship offers. It's very rare for a full ride to be offered. Typically, the amounts are between $10,000 and $50,000 per year. And as long as the student maintains satisfactory academic progress, it's renewable for all 4 years. So that holistic approach is something that they take very seriously. If a student falls into more than one category, then they definitely have a higher chance of being offered a scholarship. The email address for the admissions department is at the bottom. I'm sure you all have it saved by now, but here's their information. If you have any questions at all about scholarships, they would be the ones to speak to. Other UVM College of Medicine scholarships that are supported by our alumni. Most of our funding is spent on recruitment, but we do have a small pot of funds that are designed for matriculated students. Some might require essays, some the student might be cherry-picked if they happen to meet the criteria. But in general, it's a very diverse portfolio of scholarships where they might be specialty based, they might be honors awards based for certain events that we hold, such as, for example, senior honors night, or after the first level of the integrated curriculum is completed, we have something called the foundation celebration, and there's a couple of meritorious scholarships associated with that event. We put them in the Weekly Wire so that you're aware of them. The Weekly Wire is the Med Student newsletter. So that's how we communicate with students if there's ever scholarship opportunities for existing students. As far as outside scholarships, this really depends on how much time and effort every student wants to put into it. It's impossible for us to keep track of all outside scholarships that would pertain to graduate or MD students. One trick that I like to give is to look at the financial aid web pages at other medical schools, because often they have found outside scholarships that we have not found yet. So I use the word snoop there, but it's very much legal, of course, for you to just see what outside scholarships they might post for their students. That's one great trick that I like to give. And aside from the financial lure, awards look great on your CV. So that's another motivating factor aside from debt, is to start building up your CV with accolades, so to speak. Of course, the Student Financial Services Office know if you secure an outside scholarship, because we'll reduce your loan amount. They are found almost everywhere. I've listed some examples here specifically for medical students where you can find outside scholarships. Some billing and payment information specific to UVM. Here's a screenshot of just the UVM webpage, and in the upper right-hand corner, there's something called the My UVM portal. Yeah, some of you may have already logged on by now, but within there, there's a couple different things you can do. Mainly, it's administering your financial aid and viewing your bill, and we'll get to a screenshot again in a minute once you're logged in. Payment options, just as far as actual tuition billing, to talk about that for a minute. We will administer financial aid. We will accept wire payments. We have a monthly installment plan through a company called Nelnet. We accept one-time payments, and then, of course, payments from 529 accounts. So it's not too early to start thinking about what your tuition payment strategy is going to be. We bill one tuition rate based on residency. So the only thing we look at is if you're an out-of-state medical student or an in-state medical student. Our tuition billing has nothing to do with credits on your schedule or the year in the curriculum. It's solely which residency are you, or I'm sorry, which residency status do you have. Tuition typically increases 1 to 3% each year. Full-time tuition is always charged, so a part-time option does not exist. However, if you were to take a leave of absence, then we would prorate the tuition based on the attendance. So that's something we could talk about more in depth if you ever find yourself in that situation. But the main thing to keep in mind is that if you do take an unexpected leave, to talk with Student Financial Services so we can explain to you how we temporarily remove tuition based on how much you attended in that term. And then, as we previously mentioned, tuition happens on a semi-annual schedule. So we'll always generate bills in mid-July for the fall term, and they'd be due in mid-August each year. And then we would generate bills again in December for the spring term, and that would be due in the middle of January each year. Within the MyUVM portal, you'll also see something called a Proxy designation. This is completely optional. It's mainly handy because if you have a spouse or a parent or really anybody that's going to be helping you manage your bills, financial aid, etc., it not only allows us to verbally speak with them about your account, but it also allows them to view your bill and things like that. So it's a great tool if you would like to grant somebody else access to your student financial services item. They can't access your grades or transcripts or anything like that. It's really just billing and financial aid. So here's a screenshot. Once you log into the MyUVM portal, here's what it'll look like. A lot of the MyUVM portal actually does not apply to medical students. For example, the College of Medicine has a completely different database for scheduling. So you're not really going to be using the schedule tab very much at all. Same with the grading. I believe that they put specific grades in their own database. But within the MyUVM portal, you'll definitely be using the Student Financial Services tab. And here I've just highlighted some of the common things that you'll be clicking on, whether that's viewing your bill, signing up for direct deposit so that you can receive your living expenses, designating a proxy, viewing your package, things like that. Some next steps, if you haven't already, it's not too late to submit your FAFSA. We never run out of funding for education loans. We did offer financial aid packages for anybody that filed a complete FAFSA. So you should have an email from us by now with loan offers at the very least, and that can be found in the MyUVM portal. At this point, the loans are what we call view-only mode, and that's just because the Board of Trustees needs to approve our tuition rates in May when they meet. And until they finalize those numbers, we can't have students accepting financial aid quite yet. So all financial aid packages are in view-only mode. And then come late May, you'll actually be able to see a new feature in the financial aid package, which allows you to either accept or decline each individual item. You can accept partial amounts too. It doesn't need to be all or nothing. So don't panic if you can view your financial aid package, but it doesn't let you do anything with it. Starting early summer, anybody that has accepted any loans, we will prompt you to do things like the loan agreement online. To recap, next steps within the MyUVM portal, designating a proxy, signing up for direct deposit, and just starting to click around and get familiar with the portal. And then general student financial services items to begin thinking about your payment approach and strategies to financing your degree. It's definitely not too early to start making a monthly budget. Most medical students do need to live very frugally when they're in medical school. It's a great time to search for external scholarships. And then as always, which most of you have been great about doing, is just reaching out with any concerns or questions that you have. Some frequently asked questions that I've been receiving. When will I receive my financial aid package? So as mentioned, last week we actually issued loan offers. At the same time, admissions did give us the information on students that were already offered a scholarship. So if you were already offered a scholarship through admissions, you might see, or you would see, both loans and scholarship in your financial aid package. If you were offered a financial aid package fully consisting of loans, if admissions ends up offering you a scholarship, it is very easy for us to edit your financial aid package. We would reduce your loan and replace it with the value of the scholarship that they offer you. What will my financial aid package say? If admissions has not communicated a scholarship offer to you, your financial aid package will be entirely federal education loans. You'll see about $41,000 in the unsubsidized Stafford loan, and then any difference would be in the Graduate Plus loan. If you are a Vermont resident, you might see a subsidized UVM loan, which means it's an interest-free loan during school and your training. We do have a couple of institutional loan funds that are reserved for Vermont medical students. So you might see a couple different loan types if you're a Vermont resident. Another frequently asked question is regarding parent information on the FAFSA. If you included it so that other schools could see it, that's fine. UVM College of Medicine does not need or use parental data on the FAFSA, so you can certainly omit that in future years if you end up coming here. Even if a student includes it, we do choose to ignore it just because it's not the most helpful information. Any guides or references to navigate all of this? Oh, and I did skip the scholarship question since we already talked about that. But one thing that I'm going to click on here is the AAMC offers this wonderful resource called the Education Debt Manager. And it's designed for medical students, and it's a wonderful resource that talks about all different things. And I'm going to scroll here to the table of contents. As you can see, they talk about loan basics, they talk about budgeting, financial literacy, what happens to your loans when you're finished graduating, credit and building strong credit. They talk about tax credits having to do with education loans. It's a wonderful resource that is free to download. I definitely recommend that you pull this up. You can just do a simple Google search for AAMC 1819 Education Debt Manager. There are a lot of different versions out there because they update this every year. So you would want to use caution that you locate the most recent version, which is for the 1819 school year. I can also provide you the link if you have a hard time finding it. So that's a wonderful resource that is a great self-service tool. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint here. So that is our webinar today. I'm going to go back to our email address and our phone number right here. If you have any questions that you don't want to ask in front of the group, certainly reach out to Student Financial Services, mainly me, to request a one-on-one phone meeting. I am also going to be at Closer Look Day, and I'm going to be going over a lot of the same information again. So if you do attend Closer Look Day, my presentation is certainly optional. So if you did listen to this webinar already, you might choose a different session to go to on Closer Look Day, or you might choose to come to this session again if you're feeling a little bit nervous about financing your medical degree. We'd love to see you again. So with that being said, I wish you all the best of luck and thank you for your time.